Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barak ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So, sorry for starting 2 minutes late. We will, I think, probably be 2 minutes late every Monday moving forward, just because the halaqah, the Quran program, takes a couple of minutes for them to shuffle out. I don't want to rush the teachers or rush the students. So, but hopefully, inshallah, from now on, we'll try and stop at Maghrib. A part of me doubts that we'll be able to start at Maghrib. I think we'll always take at least 10 minutes after Maghrib until Maghrib is 9:10 or 9:15. At that point, we'll be good. Just trying to get through as much of this text as possible. All right. So it's taking longer than I initially planned for it to take in terms of how long each chapter would take. I knew that this would take time because the Matan Zad or Zad al-Mustaqni', which is what we're studying, is much more complex and it's fuller than Matan Abu Shuja', which I've taught before, and I know how long it takes to kind of get through the text and based on different levels of depth. But this one here, I haven't really done this in English before. I won't lie. I've taught it in Arabic once. I haven't taught it in English, so it's always a little bit of a challenge to teach it in a different language and figure out how long it'll take. So this may take longer. We may end up having, just to finish the rituals, it may take 2 semesters instead of, I was hoping 1 semester for the rituals and then 1 semester for maybe the mawarith and the other pieces of the matan, but this may end up being longer than I thought. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But today, inshallah ta'ala, the goal is to finish the chapter of purification and then start, inshallah, with the chapter of salah a little bit. I put an assignment in the Google Classroom. There'll be 2 assignments throughout the semester. That's it. The first one, which is the one I'm asking, is for you to make a summary of the chapter of purification, like an English summary in 500 words, nothing less than 500 words. Summarize the learning points, because if you can synthesize this information, it shows me something. If you're able to synthesize, like there's a lot of information in the text in this first chapter. Unfortunately, the way Imam Rahimahullah al-Hajjawi put it together is a little bit sporadic. Like it's not as concise or point by point. So I want to see if you can maybe summarize it, synthesize it in a way where you feel like you'd be able to go back to it. I want to see how that looks. And then inshallah we're going to be. I'm aiming to start a magazine like for this, like a wellness monthly. Or this is what I've been working on this for a while. And inshallah the best synthesis will be published inshallah the first issue inshallah that we have. So it's a little bit of an incentive for you to do the assignment. But I want to see if you're able to do that. So summarize the chapter of purification in no less than 500 words. Don't quote the text or quote evidence or quote just the information that Imam al-Hajjawi. See if you can summarize it in a way where it's easier to be, it's more accessible for students. Inshallah. So that's the first assignment, and you'll find it in the Google Classroom. I don't have a due date for it, so just as long as we get it, sometime before the end of this semester, then I'll be happy. All right. So let's recite. Let's start with continue with Abdul. So I think we did this already. Yeah, we did this. Let's see if I can move on. I did this. So yeah, we did the first part of hayd as well. So we'll start here. This is where we'll start, inshallah. So today we'll be talking about hayd and nifas, which is the last piece of the chapter of purification. Then we'll start with salah. Again, the assignment is just for the chapter of purification, just the first chapter and the summary of that. The second assignment will be much less complex, inshallah. So يقول الناظم رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه والمبتدأة تجلس أقله ثم تغتسل وتصلي فإن انقطع لأكثره فما دون اغتسلت عند انقطاعه فإن تكرر 3 فحيض وتقضي ما وجب فيه وإن عبر أكثره فمستحاضة. So a woman experiencing her first period, meaning a girl who has never menstruated before, right, and sees blood, she refrains from prayer right then and there by seeing blood discharge. Whether red, yellow, or murky. So it doesn't matter what she sees. If this is the first time, this is the first time she's ever had this, then and she only sees it once, تجلس أقله. So she spends the minimal duration of menstruation not praying and not fasting, which is the minimal duration is 24 hours, which is what we talked about this slide before. So if she sees, if a lady sees blood for the first time, she's of the age, so 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, she sees it for 1 day. It doesn't keep on going, just once. then she basically holds off, refrains from salah and all the other things that she shouldn't do when she has hayl, when she has menstruation, for the minimal duration. So that's if she sees blood just once. She then makes the purificatory bath, she does her ghusl, and prays and fasts. Okay. If the bleeding stops without exceeding the maximal duration, 15 days, she makes the purificatory bath when it stops. This is obligatory since it is possible that the bleeding is menstruation. She does the same for the second and third occurrences of bleeding. So, and then if you saw it just once, then she refrains for 24 hours. That's the menstruation. But if it goes on for 15 days, then she obviously refrains for the 15 days. Anything beyond 15 days, she goes back and she prays normally. So the 15 is the longest it can go. If this repeats 3 times, so for 3 months without variation, then all of it will be considered menstruation. Her cycle is established, and she refrains from all active worship during that for the 4th month. So what he talks about here, so the Hanabila, the way they look at it is that in these 3, the menstruation has to happen 3 times in a row, the same way, to establish a cycle. Once it establishes the cycle, then the lady will basically refrain from prayer during that time of the month regardless, once it's been 3 times in a row. That's how they look at it, right? They start refraining within that period of time. Unless, for some reason, it doesn't begin at the same time. But once it begins then that's, even if she sees, so for example, if a lady has her cycle at this time of the lunar month and it goes for 8 days and then it stops. And then the month after, the same day began, 8 days, and the 3rd month after, the same thing. So 3 times. So the month after, if it begins the same day, then she goes for 8 days, and then she stops after it. Even if there's days during those 8 where she wasn't seeing blood, or if she were to see something that wasn't clear to her after the 8 days, because now her cycle has been established, and that just makes it easier for her in terms of calculation and knowing when to go back to pray again. So she makes up for whatever obligatory prayers or fasting that she missed during that time. If her menstruation ceases and never repeats, or if she becomes menopausal before her menstruation repeats 3 times, she does not make anything up. If bleeding exceeds the maximum duration of 15 days, is irregular bleeding. So this part here of the if she menstruates and then it stops after that and she goes into menopause, which is almost impossible, very rare. There are people who have certain medical conditions where it's early menopause where it happens just once. I've never actually seen it. I've only read about it briefly. But the hukum that the Imam gives here is that if that does happen, it means she menstruates and it never repeats, and if she becomes menopausal, then she doesn't have to make anything up that was missed during that first hayd. She doesn't make for anything up, she just kind of continues normally. But that never happens, so you can basically ignore that. But if bleeding exceeds the maximum duration of 15 days, it is irregular bleeding, and she should not be refraining from salah and siyam after 15 days of hayd. But the idea from this slide is that it takes 3 menstruation periods or cycles for her to establish her cycle. When she does, then she can just go by that cycle every lunar month, sticking to it without requiring any fatwas for anything. وإن علمت عدده ونسيت موضعه من الشهر ولو في نصفه جلستها من أوله كما لا عادة لها ولا تمييز. So if she knows, this is the second, no, good, because I felt like there's something missing here. So here's, فإن كان بعض دمها أحمر وبعضه أسود ولم يعبر أكثره ولم ينقص عن أقله فهو حيضها تجلسه في الشهر الثاني والأحمر استحاضة ولم يكن دمها متميزا فعدد غالب الحيض قاعدة غالب الحيض من كل شهر. So if a woman experiencing her period for the first time has a sound or distinctive bleeding, in that some of the blood is red and some of it is dark, and the dark blood does not exceed the maximal duration of 15 days and is not shorter than the minimal duration, which is 24 hours. The dark blood is her menstruation, and the red blood is istihada. And that's what most women should be able to see the difference between, because menstruation blood is usually dark and then regular blood is not. So if she sees it, she's able to distinguish and differentiate between the 2 different bloods. Then she goes by the dark blood as long as it does not go less than 24 hours or more than 15 days. If it's less than 24, meaning the dark blood does not go for a full day, or it goes beyond that, then that's probably not menstruation blood, because it doesn't really go beyond 15 days. Even medically speaking, it doesn't go beyond 15 days. So that means she cannot distinguish, and we just kind of go back to saying 15 days is the longest and just making prayer afterwards. But once she can distinguish the black blood from the red blood, then if the black blood goes for 7 days and red blood continues, she doesn't refrain from salah and siyam after the 7th day, if it's just red blood, because khalas, she distinguished this, the menstruation blood is over now, so this red blood is istihada, even though we have not hit the 15-day mark. Right? Once you have the 15-day mark, it doesn't matter what's coming out. She prays and she fasts normally. But if she's able to distinguish between dark and red, if she's able to know, then once the dark stops, even if it's before 15 days, then she's able to go back and pray afterwards, even if the red continues moving on. Obviously, she should see a doctor, but that's the hukum of the fiqh hukum. All right. So everything I explained here, you can read this. It's not different. If the bleeding is indistinguishable, she refrains from prayer and the like for the minimal duration of menstruation for each month until the cycle repeats 3 times, from the 4th time onward. She refrains for the common duration of a menstrual cycle, 6 or 7 days from every month. She refrains from the beginning of the time that it started, if she remembers when it began. Otherwise, she refrains from the beginning of each crescent moon. That's if she cannot remember when it actually starts. والمستحاضة المعتادة والمميزة تجلس عادتها. A woman with irregular bleeding who has a regular cycle refrains from her regular period. Even if the blood is indistinguishable, she then makes a purificative bath and prays. So this is why the cycle is helpful. If she's able to establish a cycle 3 times, then the 4th month, even if she's like, I don't know what's coming out anymore, I don't know if it's, what was the cycle? 7 days, then after 7 days, have your ghusl and continue to pray, even you continue to see blood, if it's indistinguishable. If it's distinguishable, then you go by this distinction. If it's distinguishable, then the dark is hayd and the red is not hayd. And if the dark goes on longer than 7, 8 days, then you stick to that. But if she doesn't know, she's like, I don't know, it all looks the same, then what has your cycle been established as? It's been established as 7 or 8 days, and that's what you do. She sticks from that moving forward. So that's the benefit of a lady establishing 3 months in a row that are the same, calling it a cycle. So if she's not able to distinguish between the different types of blood, then she can go ahead and just stick to the cycle that she is now accustomed to. When نسيتها عملت بالتمييز الصالح. She has forgotten her regular cycle. She acts according to sound distinction by the different types of blood that she's seeing. Again, not being less than 24 hours, not exceeding 15 days, even if it changes its time or does not repeat. So I'm trying to make it easier for you because he goes into a lot of scenarios. This is simple. It's not that difficult. If a lady is able to distinguish between menstrual cycle blood and non-menstrual cycle blood, then she just goes by the menstrual cycle blood. Meaning, when the dark blood's coming out, she doesn't pray and fast, and then when that stops, she makes her ghusl and does it, even if red blood continues. If she cannot distinguish between the two, then the question is, does she have a cycle? Meaning, did she have 3 months in a row, or 3 cycles in a row that started the same day, and she was able to distinguish? If yes, then she just refrains for that period of time. She refrains just for that period of time, because she can't distinguish the different types of blood. If she does have a cycle, but she's able to distinguish the blood, she goes by what she can distinguish. If she's like, I have a cycle and it's 8 days, but this month, the menstrual blood went on beyond 8 days, and I can distinguish it from red blood. Then she continues to refrain from praying and fasting as long as she's seeing dark blood. But if she can't distinguish, it all looks the same, I have no idea, then what was your cycle before? 8 days. After the 8th day, make your ghusl and pray, even if blood continues to come out. And that's basically what all of this is explaining, without going into everything else are just details that don't really. I'll let you ask some questions at the end, inshallah. فَلَمْ يَكُنْ تَمْيِيزٌ فَغَالِبُ الْحَيْضِ كَالْعَالِمَةِ بِمَوْضِعِهِ النَّاسِيَةِ لِعَدَدِهِ. If she does not have a sound distinction, has forgotten the start and date and duration of her last menstruation, she refrains for the most common duration, 6 or 7 days, like knowing that her bleeding was sometime during the first 10 days of the month, but she does not know the number of days. She refrains from the beginning of each duration that she knows contain a menstruation, but its start date is unknown. Otherwise, her cycle commences with the beginning of each lunar month. It is the same for a woman who knows her cycle's start date but forgets its duration, such as by knowing that her bleeding would happen during the 10 middle days of the month, the beginning of the second half of the month, and the like. Thus, she would refrain for the most common duration, 6 or 7 days, at the same time of each month. If she can't distinguish, then she goes by what the most common timing is, depending on when she can remember it basically happened. And that's for someone who cannot distinguish, but knows that there was a certain duration that her menstrual cycle was stuck with. So he continues giving examples. وإن علمت عدده ونسيت موضعه من الشهر ولو في نصفه جلستها من أوله كمن لا عادة لها ولا تمييز. If she knows its duration but forgets its place in the month by not remembering if her menstruation was at the beginning, middle, or end, even if in the middle of the month she starts from the beginning of the time her menstruation would normally come, she is like a woman experiencing her first period, who has neither regularity or distinction. She refrains from the beginning of its onset according to what precedes. So if she forgot the timing of when it starts, then it's like she has her first cycle. Like the cycle, knowing cycle doesn't help anymore if she doesn't remember when it happened. If she knows, like I know what happens at the beginning of the lunar month or the middle or the end of the lunar month, then she can take 8 days within the middle of the lunar month and say this is my cycle, and she can go with that. If she doesn't know what her cycle usually begins, then she has to act. It's like hitting the reset button. It's like she's getting her cycle for the first time, and she has to go back and kind of repeat this whole, like she lost the cycle. See, ladies, when they know that their cycle is 6 days or 7 days or 8 days, that piece of information, if it's repeated 3 times, is helpful for her. It's very helpful. If she knows when it happened, when it usually happens in the month, then she can always just insert it at that time, and she can refrain from praying and fasting during that time, then and pray afterwards. If she has no idea where, she's like, I know it's 6 or 7 days, but I don't know when it starts or when it ends in the month, then she has to kind of reset and go back and do it all over again. Meaning, it's as if she's getting her period for the first time, and she has to reestablish her cycles all over again. And the reason the Hanabila get a little bit more, they go into more detail than maybe any of the other madhahib here do, is that they offer this out for a lot of the sisters, which is that if you establish the cycle and you know when it is, then this gives you, and the blood is not distinguishable, this gives you a way out if blood continues to occur, or if it breaks off earlier in the month. So it basically gives you here 3 months in a row, 7 days, khalas, it's 7 days. That's what your cycle is, as long as it's indistinguishable. So if the blood stops 5th day, you continue to 7. If the blood continues to 10th day, you finish at 7, as long as you can't distinguish between the 2 types. The moment you can distinguish, then you go by what's distinguishable. The more you can like, oh, this is menstrual blood and this is not, then if it's a menstrual cycle, then you continue. And you continue for 15 days. After 15 days, if it continues, then it doesn't matter, you go back and pray again. Right? But again, everything I'm saying, the irregularities and the excessive amount of blood and excessive bleeding, all of this requires like a visit to the gynecologist. Like it requires a family doctor or someone to take a look at why it is that this irregular bleeding is happening, because that will for sure help the sister know, and it helps even in the fiqh piece. Like if the sister is able to establish that there is a specific condition within the uterus that causes an ongoing spotting of blood that looks a certain way, and that's a piece of information that's helpful, because that does not cause her to need to refrain from fasting or from praying. It does require, obviously, repeated wudu's, but it doesn't require her to refrain. So that information is helpful. Like if you have information from a physician of a specific condition that causes a certain type of spotting, that's very helpful for you to know, because it actually affects the fiqh piece. A lot of this stuff here is based from scholars who did not have access to a lot of the medical information that we have today in terms of why ladies would spot and why they would have heavier bleeding versus less heavy bleeding. So they just go by what they can. They play scenarios and give the fatwas, because the women had questions and they needed to know what to do. Today, if this is occurring, you have the idea, but you should go figure out why. Go find out why, and that piece of information will be very valuable for you as a sister in terms of what you're going to do moving forward. ومن زادت عادتها أو تقدمت أو تأخرت فما تكرر ثلاثا فحيض. The following are considered menstruation when they repeat 3 times. Anything beyond her regular cycle, for example, if her menstruation is typically 5 days each month, but is now 6 days. So let's say she has a cycle of 5. So after 5, she's praying. But then this month, she had a bleeding of 1 extra day. She prays that day. She prays normally. The month after, same thing. It's 5 days. So after the 5th day, she makes her ghusl and prays, but she also bled that day. Then the 3rd month, the same thing. Now we have a new cycle. Now the cycle is, again, as long as it is indistinguishable. The 2 types of blood, we can't know the difference. So if it happens 3 times in a row, now this is a new cycle. Now her new cycle is 6 days. So it's no longer 5. All right? You say, was she wrong to pray before? No, she was right. She did everything correct. But now her cycle now is going to be different from moving forward. Anything that comes early, for example, her regular cycle is at the beginning of the month, but she then sees it at the end. And anything that comes late, the opposite of the previous. So if there's any shift of the days, so she always goes by what she's used. The cycle always comes the 1st day of the lunar month, finishes on the 7th day. But then there was an extra day, or it started a day before, or it started a day later. It requires 3 cycles of that happening for her to shift her cycle, right? Before the 3 times in a row occur that allows her to shift her cycle, she is safe to start the first day and finish the 7th day, right? She can always do that, even if so let's say this lunar month, her cycle is a day late, but she always starts day number 1 in the first day of the lunar month and finishes day number 7th. She does that. Well, I didn't start my bleeding. Doesn't matter. When does your cycle usually begin? It usually begins on day number 1. Then you refrain from praying that day. But it came a day later, and then I continue the day afterwards. It doesn't matter. The 7th day, you make your ghusl, and then you pray. But I saw more blood. That's fine, as long as it's indistinguishable. I'm repeating this piece because it's important, especially with the sisters. If you can distinguish menstrual cycle blood from regular blood, then no, you always go by what you can distinguish. But this is if you cannot. Yeah? So if it's a day late, like it was a day late, no, that's okay. It doesn't matter. It has to happen 3 times in a row to establish a cycle. For you to say now my cycle starts 2nd day and ends 8th day, that's fine. But not before at least three cycles occur. And that makes life easier for a lot of the sisters who have sometimes irregularities, especially as they get a little bit older. I get these questions quite often, unfortunately. وَمَا نَقَصَ عَنْ الْعَادَةِ طَهَرْ وَمَا عَادَ فِيهَا جَلَسَتْهُ. So anything shorter than her regular cycle is pure. For example, if her cycle is normally 6 days, but then the bleeding stops after 5, she makes a purificatory bath. When it ends, and prays because she has become pure. If bleeding resumes during her regular cycle, she refrains during it. Example, her regular cycle is 10 days. She bleeds for 6 days. The bleeding ceases on the 7th day, 8th day, then it returns on the 9th and 10th day. However, she refrains throughout, even during the 2 days in which the bleeding ceased, because the entire range of the days coincide with her customary period, just as if it never ceased. So she can do both, and this is what he's saying. If her period is 8 days, and after the 4th day it stopped, right? She can continue to refrain from praying until the 8th day, right? She can. If this is extremely annoying. Can you see if Abdullah Suleiman is outside? Just maybe tell me because it's extremely hard to see. Or no, there's someone who can play with the sound here a little bit. So if her period is 8 days, and after the 4th day her blood ceased, she can continue to the end of the 8th day. That's fine. She can also, if it stops completely, she can also do her ghusl and pray. But if the caveat here is that if it comes back within that period, then she has to go back and refrain. So if it comes back, for example, the day after. So day number 1, day number 2, day number 3, day number 4, there's nothing. Her cycle is 10 days though, right? I'm going to give the example as 10 days. Day number 4, it stopped. There's nothing there. She can do her ghusl and pray. And then day number 5 also, there's nothing there. She prays. Then number 6, she sees blood again, right? Because it's within the 10 days of her regular period, she goes back and refrains. It's like her hayd came back again, so she goes hayd, and she completes her 10 days. If she decides at day number 4 to continue to refrain from salah, even though she's not seeing blood, because her period is 10 days, that's fine as well. She can go for all 10 days. I don't know, it's not just, the sound is just, I don't know, it's making, yeah, I don't know if you know how to fix any of that without ruining the sota at the end for, for others. All right, so that's what I need you to know here. I'll find out in a moment. Can I move? Yeah, just to move more so I can just move to the next slide. Yeah. All right. This is the last one in purification. والصفرة والكدرة yeah, this is good. في زمن العادة حيض ومن رأت يوما دما ويوما نقاء فالدم حيض والنقاء طهر ما لم يعبر أكثره. So yellowness and murky brownish discharge during the regular cycle is considered menstruation. Thus she refrains during it, but is considered menstruation if it occurs after a regular period, even if it repeats. What did he say here? This is not a part of the matan. This is his explanation. Thus she refrains, but it is considered menstruation if it occurs after a regular period, even if it repeats. I don't know. We're going to have to take out this sentence because I don't think this is correct. So, like I said, within her period, if she sees something coming out, but it's not blood, it's yellow, it's murkish, it's brownish, it looks different, but this is her period time, then she continues to consider that period. Right? Once it's over, once the period is done, like once her cycle, her 10 days that she used is done, the brownish or yellowish discharge is no longer hayd. She doesn't consider that any hayd, and she does her ghusl and prays afterwards. But during the time of da'ada, during the cycle that she's established, Any discharge is considered a continuation of her menstruation, even if it's not necessarily blood. If she sees blood one day, or for less than a day, or more than a day, then no blood the next day. The blood is menstruation, and the cleanliness is purity. Thus, she can perform the purificatory bath and pray and fast during the duration of cleanliness, but she should not have intercourse during that time. This applies so long as the cycle does not exceed the maximum duration of 15 days, since it would be considered irregular bleeding. So, and this is just the same thing, just said in a different way again. So if her cycle is 7 days, then the first day she sees blood, and the second day she doesn't. And the third day she sees blood, and the fourth day she doesn't. And the fifth day she sees blood, and the sixth day she doesn't. So she has a choice here. She can refrain from all 7 days, which is what I would recommend, which is what the Hanbali madhab is more accustomed to giving the fatwa based on. But she also has the option, if it's a day of complete with nothing there, to make ghusl and pray. She may only get 2 prayers in. She may only get maybe, for example, because she went through from the morning until also there's nothing at all. She feels it. She prays, she does ghusl, prays maghrib and isha, but then at the next morning she finds blood again, then she refrains again. So she can do that if she wants to, or she can just refrain for the full period of the 7-day cycle that she's used to. And generally speaking, I want to make sure that I think this is the end, right? No, there's one more. So I'll read this and then I'll give you the isn't it? There's actually a little bit more. So I'll finish it, then I'll give you the final kind of the bottom line regarding what you need to know. والمستحاضة ونحوها تغسل فرجها وتعصبه وتتوضأ لوقت كل صلاة وتصلي فروضا ونوافل ولا توطأ إلا مع خوف العنة ويستحب غسلها لكل صلاة. So a lady who sees irregular bleeding, she basically performs wudu and she cleanses the area, and she makes sure that there's no way for her during salah to drop blood on her clothing or on the ground that she's praying on, if she's praying on something. So she just makes sure that she does whatever she needs to achieve that, which today is much easier than it was maybe 1400 years ago when they didn't have all the equipment that exists today. And she makes wudu for every single salah, and she prays furud and nawafil. She can pray nafila. It doesn't mean she can only pray dhuhr. No, she can pray dhuhr and the sunnah of dhuhr with the same wudu. But he has to make wudu for dhuhr, and then wudu for asr, and then wudu for as long as she continues to have istihada, or she continues to have irregular bleeding. And she should not have intercourse unless there is fear for her or for her spouse of fault, which means that it's not haram for them to have that type of intercourse, but it's also makruh. And I think the karaha here is more medical than anything, meaning until it's understood why is it that she's bleeding, and whether this type of relations may make things worse versus not have an effect on her at all. ويستحب غسلها لكل صلاة, and if she's capable to have a ghusl for every salah, it's better, but a wudu yujzi. Wudu is more than enough for that. وأكثر مدة, so you can talk about nifas. So before we talk about nifas, I'll kind of give you the bottom line. So the bottom line for hayd, the fatwa that ladies need to know, is that regardless of, we're not going to talk about when it starts for sisters, because that's established now and more medically than it was regarding. For the Hanabila, the shortest amount of duration of time for menstruation is 24 hours. The longest amount is 15 days. Anything that precedes 15 days, she makes a ghusl and she starts to pray. Even if the blood is dark black, it doesn't make a difference. After 15 days, she goes ahead and she makes her ghusl and she starts to pray and she continues forward. Again, all of these irregularities require medical checkups, but I'm talking about the fiqhi piece of it. Right? Anything that less than 24 hours is not considered. You can't consider that. Hayd is something different, because hayd has to be at least a full day. So someone who's just starting out, it takes 3 cycles for her to establish, 3 periods for her to establish a cycle. Right? There are 2 situations. If the blood is distinguishable versus if it's not distinguishable. If it's distinguishable, meaning you're able to distinguish dark black blood from red blood, then as long as she's seeing the dark black blood, then she is in hayd, she's in menstruation. Up to 15 days after that, she will always make ghusl and pray. If she can't distinguish blood, then she needs to build the cycle, like have a habit. So if the first month is 8 days, second month start the same day, 8 days, third month start the same day, 8 days, now she has a cycle. She knows when the day starts and when it ends. Now, if she is someone who does not have distinguishable bleeding, she can't distinguish what blood she's seeing, she is safe to always start at that same lunar day and end with the same day, right? Even if there's a small variation within the timing of bleeding or how long it goes. She can still just start the first day. Let's say someone starts the 7th day of the lunar month, finishes the 15th, and the bleeding happened the 6th. She can still start the 7th. If the bleeding happened the 8th, she can still start the 7th until 3 periods in a row that happens, and at that point the cycle shifts. Right? And then she can shift the cycle after 3 times of that happening. And now, if, for example, she was always getting her cycle 1 day before, after 3 cycles in a row, 3 periods in a row that happening, she shifts her cycle. Now it starts the 16th and it finishes, for example, the 14th, or maybe it continues to finish at the 15th, regardless. So she knows. This is indistinguishable. If it's distinguishable, none of this is required. If she sees the difference, then she just follows that simplistically. If she can't, then she uses this cycle as helpful. It's a helpful way for her to figure out where she begins and when she ends. If during that cycle, she ends up having days where she doesn't see blood, she has the ability, if she wants to make her ghusl and pray. But if the blood comes back within that cycle period, then she has to stop, because that's within her cycle period. Right? It's not a new cycle. It's a continuation of the one before. And she's also very much allowed to not do ghusl and pray. She can refrain even if there's a day or two within her cycle where she's not seeing blood. That's fine. She can continue to not pray and not fast because that's her cycle. Even if the blood is sporadic within it, that's fine as well. Anything that she sees, any discharge she sees within her cycle is considered hayd. Anything that she sees within her cycle is considered hayd. After her cycle, if she sees discharge that is not blood, then she continues to pray normally, right? Again, all of these things would require a visit to the physician, but she would, if her cycle finishes the 15th and the 16th day, there's discharge, but it's not blood. She makes her ghusl and she prays normally, because this is not considered to be hayd, right? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Then it's going to be 15 days every time. If you bleed that long. If someone's bleeding that long, it's going to be 15 days every time. So if I have no cycle, it just happens when it happens. I don't know when it's going to happen. How long does it happen for? If it happens for 7 days, after the 7th day is done, you make your ghusl. But let's say someone is continuously always spotting for a long period of time, 15 days, and then you can go ahead. Now, what's better than that is that she goes and she figures out why. If she figures out why, like what medically is happening, that is information that can be brought into this discussion. Meaning if she's able, because medically speaking, they're able to figure out, like medicine can figure out the cycle for you. If you have, and they can tell you why you're having spotting. And they can distinguish spotting and menstrual cycles for ladies. And once medicine tells you, here's your cycle, you're good. Like if you have access, and let's say technology, and ladies are able, without going to the physician, to establish based on hormone levels, and based on that this is when her cycle is beginning and this is when it's ending. Then we don't have to do any of this. You can just follow that at that point. All of this is there because there was no way for us to actually know for sure what exactly is happening inside. So we're using the tools that we have, which is distinguishing between different types of blood, to make sure that the lady is not being forced to pray more than she had, like to fast when she shouldn't be fasting or doesn't have to fast, versus the opposite, where she's being asked to refrain when she shouldn't have to refrain. So if there's no cycle, then she just goes by the vision of blood. When the blood stops, she makes a ghusl and prays. If the blood continues, you go for 15 days. After 15 days, you're in the clear. Even if you're seeing blood, makes no difference. If you're seeing blood, you just have to make wudu before each salah, and that's it. But then again, getting answers of what's going on, that's helpful, because then you can come back to, well, this person has a specific condition and it causes for certain types of spotting at certain times of the month, so we can ignore all that. We can ignore anything that we know is not hayd for sure. So this is the advantage of kind of having access to reasonable healthcare. Yeah. Say again? Yeah, we just don't know. There's no. Yes, you should. So a lady should try to establish herself. And most do, without even fiqh. They do. Like most ladies know what time of the month they begin, what time of them at the end. But if there's no regularity, then we can't call it's not a cycle anymore, because there's no regularity to it. If it's irregular altogether, then khalas, it's irregular, meaning it's one day, like she doesn't have cycles that start the first same day of every lunar month. Sometimes it's 7th, sometimes 9th, sometimes 5th. There's no regularity, so we can't call it a cycle. So she just goes by the vision of blood, the shortest being 24 hours, the longest being 15 days. But because the difference between 24 hours and 15 days is 2 weeks, it's just a long time, the idea of a cycle makes it easier. If you have a cycle, khalas, small variations, ignore a small variation. Stick to the cycle because you have it, right? The small variations don't matter. If those variations are regular 3 times in a row, now they become the new cycle, and we kind of shift over to that, right? And this is all based on the fact that we cannot distinguish. The reason I'm saying this word so many times is because he gave you hear their logic and reason behind. They're saying distinguishable, right? They're saying if you can distinguish, then you go by that. So today we have technology where we can distinguish whether this is this or this is that. So if you can distinguish it, then you go by what's distinguishable. Like this is not it's not mystic. It's just based on the fact that they don't know what's going on. So if a lady has these irregularities, getting some input from a medical professional to figure out what is and what isn't is very valuable and very important, and it makes a huge difference. And I've had sisters who've asked me questions, and then like have you seen a physician? Not in the last 15 years. طب ليش يا أختي? طب go and have there's something going on, like bleeding, like irregular bleeding is actually something that requires medical attention. There's a lot of different things that could be occurring, and once it's figured out what is menstruation, what is not, then خلاص you're good. You good. Irregular bleeding. Irregular bleeding. Yeah. So it's either what happens after 15 days. Yeah. Hayd is the first 15 days, and istihala is after the 15 days. Or istihala can also be distinguishable red blood, meaning it's not hayd blood. She knows this is not hayd blood, this is red blood. My cycle is 7 days, I'm done. This blood is not dark. This is I distinguish it. It's called istihala. So those are the two. So we just say irregular bleeding because to say irregular, there has to be regular. I mean, she has to know what the regular is, or else it's not called that. Then it's just whatever happens after 15 days. Okay. All right. Yeah, we're for sure not going to get through the rituals in this first semester. But that's okay, inshallah. As long as people are learning something, it's okay. He goes through a lot of details. He goes through a lot of details, which is not bad, but it takes a long time to go through things. So we'll finish, inshallah. We'll finish the nifas today. I'll end there. I'll start salah next week for you. So we'll aim to finish maybe tahara and salah, maybe siyam this semester, and then zakah and hajj and mawarith next semester. I'll see how. I have to go back and break this down differently in terms of what we're going to get done versus what we're not. So أكثر مدة النفاس 40 يوما. The maximum duration of lokia, which is just postpartum bleeding. So bleeding that happens after a lady gives birth, right? So the maximum duration is 40 days. After 40 days, she makes ghusl and she prays and she fasts, and she can have intercourse as long as if she's not bleeding. If she's bleeding, then it's makruh for that to happen until the bleeding stops. And again, that's a medical thing more than it is a ritual one. So the duration begins with giving birth. What is seen 2 or 3 days before birth is lokia, but it does not count as part of the duration. So you don't the lady doesn't count anything that happens before birth. You start counting from the day she gives birth. That's day number 1, right? And then 40 is the longest. There's no minimal duration. Menstruation and regular bleeding do not occur during the time for lokia anyways. So let's say a lady gives birth, and then day number 20, there's absolutely nothing. There's no discharge at all, right? Everything has completely stopped. She gives another day to make sure that's the case, and if that's the case, then her nifas is over. It doesn't have to be 40 days. It doesn't have to be. Most of the time it is, but it does not have to be 40 days. It can be well under 40 days, if I can tell you that much. It can be well under 40 days. It can be a week. I've seen it. A week is quite often. It's quite common. But 40 days is the longest. And sometimes there's a lot of discharge that's happening throughout these days. Some of it blood, some of it not blood. As long as there's discharge happening, a regular discharge happening in the 40 days, then it continues to be nifas, even if it's not necessarily blood. As long as within the 40 days, then it's considered nifas. Okay. وَمَتَى طَهُرَتْ قَبْلَهُ تَطَهَّرَتْ وَصَلَّتْ. Whenever she becomes clean, or she's not seeing bleeding anymore, before the maximum duration of 40 days, she makes the ghusl, and then she starts to fast normally and pray normally. Everything goes back to normal. ويكره طهورها قبل 40 بعد التطهير. فإن عاودها الدم فمشكوك فيه تصوم وتصلي وتقضي الواجب. It is offensive to have sexual intercourse with her after she becomes pure if the purity commences before the 40 days elapse. Again, so if the dam ends at 1 week, there's nothing at all. It's makruh. It's not haram anymore for her to have relations with her spouse, but it's makruh until the 40 days are over. But it's not haram. If she fasts and prays and makes up the obligatory, if bleeding resumes, there is doubt concerning it. She fasts and prays and makes up the obligatory fasting only, since making up the prayer is not obligatory. So if she sees dam again, then basically she stops. If she sees blood again before the 40 days, then she stops and she has to make up for the fasting that she did. Meaning, so let's say the 7th day she was done, so she starts fasting, and then it comes back again. So those days that she fasted, she has to repeat. Those days of fasted didn't count because her nifas is still going on. No, nafil, no, but if it's fard. Salah, she doesn't have to make anything up, but in salah, siyam, she does. Okay. وهو كالحيض فيما يحل ويحرم ويجب ويسقط غير العدة والبلوغ. So lokia is akin to menstruation with respect to what is lawful, what is unlawful, what it necessitates, what it drops, like the obligation to pray. So when hayd and nifas always come together. So whatever is haram during hayd is haram during nifas. Whatever is wajib during hayd is wajib during nifas. So basically, there's no difference in terms of the jurisprudence-based rulings regarding hayd and nifas. They're the same. But it differs from menstruation with respect to the waiting period for divorce and the attainment of maturity. And we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about this in a different bab or chapter altogether, inshallah. وإن ولدت توأمين فأول النفاس وآخره من أولهما. If she gives birth to twins, the beginning and ending of her lokia is calculated from the first birth, not the second. In case there's more than, sometimes it can be 24 hours between the birth of twins. Sometimes even more. I'm not sure if labors can be sometimes. It doesn't happen anymore because whenever it goes over, they don't go for 24 hours anymore. They just go to a C-section. Or do something, they induce it in ways that they couldn't induce it before. But labors could sometimes go for 48 and 72 hours. They're very excruciating. So if she's giving birth to more than one child, then her lokia, like the nifas, starts the calculation from the first child. So not from the last child, just in case there's like a 24-hour gap between the first and the second. If more than 40 days pass between the birth of the first child and the last, there is no lokia for the second. This is... I don't know if this ever happened. If there's a lady who went to labor for 39 days, I don't know if that ever occurred. I don't know if that ever occurred. Maybe historically. There's weird things. If you read Adab al-Tibbi, the historical medicine literature, there's like we took 2 courses in this when we were in medical school. I don't know if they do that here in Canada or not. I never asked. It's different because here they only do 4 years of medical school. As postgrad, we did 8 years of medical school. Like there's no undergrad, so you just go 8 years. So there's a lot of time. So they give you a lot of different courses. So we did 2 courses of medical literature, and some of it talks about stories of how medicine evolved and what people did like before a certain. And by the way, the population crisis we're looking at comes from obstetrics. The problem in the world today, the problem with numbers comes from the change that happened in anesthesia and obstetrics. Like those 2 fields changed the world completely, because you went from a birth, mortality rate with birth that was around maybe 25% to less than 1%, which completely, it's an algorithmic, like the number, how people increase in numbers is not linear, it's an algorithmic change. So that made a huge boost in numbers of human beings on the planet. So it's responsible for the population crisis that's happening is the quality of care that occurs when ladies are having birth, because it was very different many years ago. There are really weird stories, not anything to do with the fiqh piece, but there's stories of like people who need amputations, and like there's this German doctor that he was an orthopedic surgeon, so he would take the consent of a patient like to amputate, and then the consent was that all means necessary, understanding that the patient will fight back, and he would be a big guy, so the patient would run away, he would kick the door down and go pull him out of the the patient's fighting back, and the doctor puts his knee on his neck, and he saws his leg off. It's all agreed. It's all the sign and consent that this is going to happen. We have no anesthesia for you, but this is the best we can do. So there's a lot of like, medically speaking, historically, there's a lot of things that occur that we don't have good examples for today. We don't fully understand. So don't really mind the details that sometimes he gives in the fiqh books, and not just Imam Hajjawi, but any other fiqh book that you read. You'll sometimes hear something. Yani al-khuntha, for example, khuntha al-mushkil, which is like someone whose genitalia is not clearly definable or identifiable. I don't even know what that means. Like no one, even the people who explain it in fiqh books, I don't understand exactly what they're talking about. So we just completely ignore it. Like when you study fiqh, you just completely ignore any hukum to do with al-khuntha al-mushkil, because I have no idea what that requires or what it dictates. Because today, there are, medically speaking, there are ways to understand who it is that you're dealing with. But these terms had certain meanings back then that I don't understand exactly what they're referring to today. And even if I did, I don't know if it would mean anything to begin with. Anyways. Which is very rare, but that could happen. No, it has happened. It's the closest thing to impossible for a lady to get pregnant when she's pregnant, but it can happen. Very rarely, and there are some, again, medical literature, there are examples of that. Like there's a few examples of ladies who had two pregnancies, one that was due and one was like 4 months in, so there are stuff like that. And of course, in those situations, you need a faqih that's going to listen to this story and then give the fatwa based on it. A primary text study is not going to prepare you for something as wild as that. So don't offer answers there. So whoever induces lokium by streaking the stomach or drinking medicine does not make up missed prayers. So any playing around or trying to take medicine to finish it quickly or something, once you do that, you go for 40 days. So you have to leave the nifas to happen normally. It's not like that for menstruation. So for menstruation, if a lady takes a pill and it organizes her cycle for her, that's fine. That's totally fine. But for nifas, you just let it be. You don't induce anything or change anything. And that's the end of purification. That was very long. Usually this takes two lessons, not 5. So we spent a reasonable amount of time within the purification chapter. The assignment, that's why the assignment is on it, because it took so much time, and it's actually, there's a lot of information in it. What I want you to do is to synthesize the information to the best of your ability in English, for 500 words or more, like nothing less than that, and don't quote the text in Arabic or in English, just put down what you would use to study, or how you would put this information in a way that you could later on look back at and actually benefit from or learn from. And inshallah, the best summary we'll publish it, and it'll add up to about 15% of your mark. So take some time and do it. It's helpful. It's helpful because any other fiqh book that you study in the future, or not just fiqh book, but any other text, not all Islamic texts are as well written as Abu Shuja''s Ghaya al-Taqrib. Most of them are not. Most of them are written. They're a little bit more sporadic in the way that they approach the topic and the subject. They're not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 categorized exactly the way we're used to studying things. There are more recent books that are written within Islamic law that have that in them. I choose not to teach them because I think there's a benefit in the connection that Muslims should have with the authentic and original text that they have in there. It's very rare for you to be able to study something that's 800 years old, and the information to be still very relevant. Maybe the way that he organized it is not perfect, but the information is very relevant. It's still the same stuff, with very small. I'm just pointing out one thing here, one thing there, like a few examples here, a few examples that maybe don't apply anymore. But that's quite impressive for something that was written. You understand, like 800 years ago. How long ago was Shakespeare? No, when was the Shakespearean? When was the Shakespearean era? It's 1,000 years ago, right? Isn't it, or 500 years ago? Something. So maybe 500. So 500 years ago, if you read Shakespeare in English, it's like a different language altogether. There's nothing there for you. But this is like 800 years ago. I can read it for you in Arabic. Still very, very relevant. Still very clear. So I think there's authenticity to it. But if you want something that's synthesized, you'll find there's a lot of books that are written within fiqh that are written by modern scholars and translated that break things down quite easily for you. But they are basing their knowledge on what? On this. So that's the point. Like when you see a modern text written, the person who wrote the text, what did the person who wrote the text base their knowledge on? They based it on this. So why go to a secondary source. Just go back to the source. Go back to where it all began. I think there's value for you to do that. Even if you end up studying a secondary text and tertiary texts that were written based off these, that's fine. But it's nice for you to go back to the naba', go back to the actual source of the knowledge itself. To me, it's a meaningful thing to share with you, because I think you'll identify with the richness of your culture a little bit more when we do so. So let's read a few words in the Kitab al-Salah before we go for Salah. So obviously this is the longest of the chapters within any book of fiqh, especially when you talk about the rituals piece. So mu'amalat is the longest. Mu'amalat and the biyu', and it has the longest, most information in it. But in terms of rituals, so when we talk about tahara, salah, siyam, zakah, hajj, right? These five, salah is always the longest, has the most information. Hajj usually comes in second because it has a lot of examples as well, but salah just has the most in it. Tahara is usually second or third, but here tahara seems to be a bit longer, so because of all the examples that he gave. So we'll read inshallah this. Actually, there's a lot of information here, but it's not as complicated. Like, it's easy because everyone here prays, so I'm just going to give you the little points that the Hanabila do differently, and we pray pretty much the Hanbali madhab. The leadership of salah here is mostly Hanbali, mostly, in most of the details that occur. For example, for Tarawih, for sure, we run the Hanbali madhab hands down. Aside from maybe the number of raka'at that we do, where we kind of deviate from everybody, but outside of the number of raka'at, it's very similar to, it's almost exactly Hanbali, so you'll find this to be quite identifiable or relevant. So يقول الناظم رحمه الله يعني تجب على كتاب الصلاة تجب على كل مسلم مكلف إلا حائضا ونفساء. So prayers are obligatory for every responsible Muslim except during menstruation and lukia. ويقضي من زال عقله بنوم أو إغماء أو سكر أو نحوه. Missed prayers are made up by anyone who has lost or loses consciousness during the time of prayer due to sleep, fainting, intoxication, or the like. So if you miss a prayer because you weren't there mentally, your intellect, your brain was out for whatever reason, then you have to make up for that salah, whether you were asleep or you were knocked out or you were some other reason. You have to make up for it. He doesn't talk about who is mukallaf right away, but he talks about it. He kind of goes through it a little bit here. ولا تصح من مجنون ولا كافر فإن صلى فمسلم الحكم. So prayer is not valid from someone who is insane. They can pray, but it's not valid. And if the person goes through phases of insanity, then the prayers he prayed during his insanity don't count. He has to make up for them, right? So that's a piece that's important here also. However, if a non-Muslim prays, he is legally seen as a Muslim. So if a kafir walks in and starts to pray with us, and he prays every salah, then in a Muslim country, he would be seen legally as Muslim, meaning the rights of Muslims and the obligations of a Muslim would apply to this person, even if they as far as we didn't come and give their shahada to us, nor do we know about it. Salah, they become Muslim hukman with us in terms of the legality. And this is within Dar al-Islam, yeah. Insanity, madness, loss of mind, loss of... he wouldn't. People around him would. No, he wouldn't. The person doesn't know. The person will find madness as they wake up. I mean, maybe psychosis could be seen similar to that, but that's a discussion. That's a difficult discussion. Alzheimer's, خلاص رفع عنه القلم, and that's not temporary, anyways. Alzheimer's is not temporary. Alzheimer's is ongoing, and once someone has Alzheimer's, they're not responsible anymore. They're not competent anymore. They're not legally competent. They're not religiously competent anymore. So whether they pray or not, sometimes this happens. Someone who's very, very ill, very old, demented, and they want to pray because that's what they've been doing all their lives. And the son is like, well, he's doing it wrong, not making wudu properly. I'm like, who cares? Let him do whatever he wants. Like whatever he wants. Pray your salah, and then sit there with your dad and do whatever your dad wants. He wants to pray Imam. He wants you to pray Imam. He wants to repeat it a few times. He does like 5 ruku'at and 6 sujudat, and he falls asleep in the middle of salah and wakes up again. Doesn't matter. He's not responsible. He's not religiously responsible for anything anymore. We just do this to make him happy, whatever makes him happy, because he's not responsible. But you are, so make sure you do your salah appropriately. And then entertain your father in terms of whatever he wants. People who are demented should not be they're not responsible, so don't get all upset. He's not doing wudu properly. If he never prayed at all, it wouldn't matter. ويؤمر بها صغير ل7 ويضرب عليها ل10. Children are ordered to perform the prayer upon reaching 7 lunar years. They're disciplined for not performing it upon reaching 10. And this is a Hanbali. Yes. Yeah. So there's a bunch of like diseases that cause. anything that causes mental retardation, or lack of intellectual or mental competence. These are things that are defined by lawyers in courts. If it's not clear, if it's not obvious that this person is incompetent, then you need to take it to law. And sometimes it happens, especially in hospitals where I work. This happens a lot, where the person is, they can't make a decision. Like family members are asking them to make decisions on stuff that they don't have the intellectual capacity to actually understand what's being said to them to begin with. So, and establishing competence is very difficult and tiring. But it's important because sometimes decisions are going to be needed to be made for their well-being and their health, and sometimes their financials and stuff. So most of the time it's obvious this person is not competent. But if it's not, then sometimes you need to bring in medical professionals and lawyers. Lawyers bring in the legal part, and the medical professionals bring in the assessment of cognitive ability. So the cognition piece needs to be assessed by a doctor, but the legal piece will need a lawyer. So this part is Hanbali, the discipline upon reaching 10. You don't really find it in any other madhab as far as I can remember. Maybe the Malikiya talked about it, maybe. I haven't read one of their texts for a while now. I haven't taught something in the Maliki madhab for years. So I don't remember. But you don't find it in most of the other madhab in terms of hitting a child to pray for 10. And Talib here is not really, it's discipline. He translated it perfectly. It's really not hitting or smacking. It's more disciplining them, meaning there's reward, there's incentive, and there's consequences for them not to pray in order to get them to start praying. But the Prophet ﷺ never hit anyone for salah, and I don't think anyone being forced for salah is helpful. But the concept of discipline is there. But this is quite often misquoted by people and is misused as well, in terms of how they treat their kids and try to teach their kids to salli. And they think that they read this and no one explained to them matan, so they think it means that after a certain age, you can start smacking him around if he doesn't pray. That's not what this is about. That's not what he's trying to explain here. It's more the concept of disciplining. Discipline is there because when they're 7, when they're 7 years old, you just kind of encourage and remind. And so when they're 10, you start requiring them. It's like any other form of discipline, where you require someone to do something. If they do it, then they get rewarded. If they don't do it, then they can lose a privilege. And that's what yudrab alayha means. Darb is a very, very, very versatile word that does not mean actual hitting. The majority of its usages within the language, but that's a discussion for another day. فإن بلغ في أثنائها أو بعدها في وقتها أعاد. So if a child reaches adolescence while praying or afterwards, and the prayer is still within its time, the prayer is repeated. So again, almost never happens, but if someone reaches puberty during a salah, they repeat it. They repeat it if the time is there. If they reach puberty during dhuhr and then they did their ghusl and dhuhr is still there, they have to repeat. They have to repeat dhuhr. ويحرم تأخيرها عن وقتها إلا لناوي الجمع ولمشتغل بشرطها الذي يحصله قريبا. So it's unlawful to delay prayers beyond their preferred time or after their time, unless one intends to join prayers, or if one is busy fulfilling one of its preconditions and it is close to completion. For example, if his only garment is torn, he will not finish stitching before time exists. So you should not, it's haram for the Hanabila to postpone a prayer from its time, except if you're on safar and your niyyah is to do jama', to put them together because you're traveling, or if you're doing what's needed, like you need a few minutes to get the water warm to do a ghusl so you can pray. So you're just doing whatever you need to do to obtain the condition that's required to pray salah, then you're fine. But just kind of postponing it for no reason, with the Hanabila, it's muharram. It's not like for the rest, but we'll go for salah inshallah, and then maybe I'll talk maybe for 5 minutes after salah just to wrap things up, and then we'll let you go inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Then we'll break. Next week, Maghrib will be like 9:05 or 9:06 or something. So we'll start at 8 and we'll go until Adhan Maghrib, then we'll be done. But since I want to get at least an hour and a few minutes in, so I want to continue a few more pieces here in the matan. So I want to talk about this piece because it's controversial, and it's a nice time to do it right at the end, so you can walk away with something controversial as you go home. ومن جحد وجوبها كفر وكذا تاركها تهاونا ودعاه إمام أو نائبه فأصر وضاق وقت الثانية عنها ولا يقتل حتى يستتاب ثلاثا فيهما. So this is a specificity of the Hanbali madhab. It's a specific aspect of their madhab, and it's important because it caused a lot of controversy throughout history. Till this day, it still does. Anyone who denies the obligation of prayer has committed apostasy. He says disbelief here, but it's apostasy that what he's pointing out. So this is because he has effectively declared Allah, His Messenger, and the consensus of the Muslim community to be false. If he claims ignorance and is new to Islam, he is informed that prayer is required and not judged to be a disbeliever since he has an excuse. So we're talking about, and this is always a little bit of commentary here. So if someone who's Muslim refuses to pray, وَمَنْ جَحَدَ وُجُوبَهَا كَفَرْ. We have to know why. Is the reason because they just didn't know? Or is it because they're struggling to do it? Or because jahada wujubaha? Jahada wujubaha here, wujubaha means that they deny that it's obligatory. It's a problem in Islam. I don't agree with the Hanbali opinion on what we're going to read in a few moments, but I do understand where it comes from. Because there's a difference between, for example, someone drinking and saying I'm weak and I'm struggling versus it's not haram. It's not the same thing. That's not even remotely close to being the same. Someone could say, I know it's haram, but I'm not putting any effort into stopping because I gave up on this long time ago, but I know it's haram. That's one thing to declare. That's your decision in terms of what you're doing with your own life. But when you decide to say that no, it's not haram, it never was, and that is now you're trying to change what Islam is. Meaning you're challenging the basis, the core of Islamic law. And there are things that are just not debatable within Islam, and salah is obviously right on top of that list in terms of the things that are obligatory. It's right on top of that list. The 5 salawat are fard. We have to do them. That is the basis of this da'wah that we carry. So someone who is declaring that it's not, وَمَنْ جَحَدَ كَفَرْ, meaning they leave Islam. This is what, and I agree with that term. وَمَنْ جَحَدَ وُجُوبَهَا كَفَرْ, I agree with that. I don't think that's wrong. I think obviously growing up in the era that we all grew up in, the problem of takfir is big, right? And I agree with it. It's a word that should be used very. It's a word that should not be used by awam, by laymen, or even students of knowledge, not by any stretch of the imagination. You don't use that terminology. Only scholars use that terminology, and not just scholars who are qualified to be judges. Like scholars who have enough knowledge that they could be a judge. And of course in Islam, if you understand how scholarship works, there are different degrees of it. The highest degree is when you are qualified to be a judge. Like Abu Hanifa al-Nu'man, for example, and Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, and the scholars of anything less than that, no, you don't do, because it's a big term. So, but for sure, when you deny the existence of something that is known within Islam to be factual. For example, for you to deny the prophecy of Musa alayhi salam, so he wasn't a prophet, or he didn't exist, or he's not real. Right? Or you deny, for example, the authenticity of the Quran, or you deny that's kufr. You've left Islam. Or you say, I believe in everything, but I believe in a prophet after Muhammad alayhi salam. Kufr. You're no longer Muslim. Like you left. Islam is a river, but it has banks. Saying that, you're now on the outside of that bank. That's not an opinion that is acceptable within Islam. Like you have to have. There are opinions that are acceptable within Islam, no problem. We can differ on them. We can have different goals. But certain opinions you will at least when you defy a clear. That's why studying usul al-fiqh is important. Usul al-fiqh is where you figure out what can you define, what can you not define. There are certain things. Usul al-fiqh explains to you what is not defiable, what is not negotiable, what is not debatable within the understanding, within the linguistics of the book, very clearly established. And what is a little bit open, meaning, all right, this can be, I don't agree with you, but I can understand where you're coming from. And you have a weak argument, but it's an argument. It's not completely insane. Like it's not without merit. There's some merit to it, even though I don't agree with it. That's why when we talk about dogs and pigs, for example, it's not kufr. It's just an opinion, because there's different ways to interpret this evidence. But when it comes for salah, say it's not obligatory. No, that doesn't. Faqad kafar, for sure. They left Islam by doing that. But here's where the point is. So it is the same. So for the Hanbali, it's the same for someone who abandons prayer out of negligence or laziness. And the imam or a substitute has invited him to perform. He persists in abandoning it until the second of 2 consecutive prayers times on the verge of running out. Meaning, he's someone who's doing it, he's not praying out of laziness or whatever, and then he's brought in to pray, and he's being encouraged to do that, and the imam, meaning the leader, is commanding, and he's not doing it, and the time runs out. Neither one, meaning neither he who denies its obligation, nor he who omits it out of neglect, is killed until they have been asked to repent 3 times. So they are seen as murtad, as those who committed apostasy. And they are given 3 chances to repent, and if they don't repent, then they are executed. And this was the ruling of the Hanbali madhab on this issue. And of course, this ruling caused a lot of controversy for many, many years afterwards. till this day is heavily argued. The problem for it, to me, is really not the specificity of this ruling regarding salah. It's rather the issue with, and I've talked about this even in the Shafi'i matan that we explained, and I talked about it in other settings as well, is the ruling on apostasy itself. The ruling on apostasy itself continued and carried a certain weight for a prolonged period of time beyond what it should have ever carried in terms of the merit of it. Meaning the ruling of execution of the person who commits apostasy was designed for, there was a reasoning, there was a logic behind it for why it was the case, and it was supposed to continue for a specific period of time. And then when that time was over, then you were able to default to la ikraha fi din, and people can make the choice of what their religion is. But it doesn't. And I think a part of it was political, because a part of it was to maintain and protect the Muslim population, not opening the door. Rulers get scared of opening too many freedoms, and then people being misguided and then doing whatever they want, and then ending up with a whole different demographic and a whole different set of problems. I'm not defending them, I think it's wrong, but I'm just saying to you where it comes from. So because of that, the ruling of apostasy continued. The ruling of apostasy is why we have this issue. This issue to begin with. You wouldn't have this wording wouldn't exist here without the ruling of apostasy being there. However, the piece that I disagree with on the Hanbali is that they look at someone who leaves prayer out of tahawun, out of just being negligent or being lazy, as also someone who is going to be called an apostate, like someone who performed apostasy. If you jahat wujub al-salah, that you left Islam by doing that, that's fine, understandable. Then that person will be put under that scrutiny and maybe executed. But someone who's not praying because they're lazy are being treated equally. And that's where the Hanbali madhab, in my opinion, is a little bit too strict on the topic, and they're the only ones who are. Like out of the four, none of the other three carry this specific ruling. But the ruling itself comes from the fact of the problematic aspect of it comes from the fact that the person who commits apostasy within these rulings was executed, was seen to be executed. How many times has it happened? Almost never. Like historically, how many times has it actually happened? Almost never, because it just wasn't regulated to the degree that you think it was regulated. Like a lot of the examples that we went through here, and I told you how often does this happen, and we both look at each other like this probably never ever happened. This is another example. But the fact that it's there, of course, was taken, and then it was magnified by those who supported it, and then magnified by those who didn't support it. And it became a topic of argument back and forth, and it was blown out of proportion in terms of what weight it carries in our deen. But I'm telling you where the problem comes from. It's a two-tier problem. Number one is when someone performs apostasy, what is the ruling? I don't believe that the ruling is execution. It existed during the Prophet ﷺ's time to be that, and for good reason, because it was an act of treason. At the time when you performed apostasy, you basically left Islam, you went to the enemy and you informed them of everything so it wasn't an act of faith, meaning no one came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, I just don't believe in what you're telling me anymore, and then off with his head. No, that never happened. It was someone who basically betrayed them, acted like Muslim for a long time, then went to the enemy, and that was the murtad. That was the mufaraq al-jama'ah is the wording in the hadith. And I talked about this in my hadith course that I did last semester, and I explained it a little bit more. But then the ruling continued for political reasons, wallahu alam, and it took a while for it. It doesn't exist. Like today, the majority of madhahib don't, they cite it in their books, but then they don't give the fatwa based on that, in terms of modern in modern settings. So that's the first tier. The second tier, that the Hanabila saw that a Muslim who does not pray, even though they say prayer is fard, but they just don't do it for whatever reason, and they're asked and they're brought in to do it, and they still don't do it, that person is now also being looked at as someone who committed apostasy, which is, in my opinion, a little bit too excessive and a bit too heavy. But that is what their opinion is. You want to say something? Yeah. So apostasy is basically leaving Islam. You're a Muslim and now you're no longer a Muslim. You choose to no longer be a Muslim or do something that removes you from Islam. Like you were Muslim, but then you did something to remove you by basically denying the obligation of salah. saying salah is not obligated. It never was. That is not compatible with basic, with core Islamic understandings anymore. So that's what I wanted to explain to you. So, but for them, حتى يستتاب ثلاثا فيهما, they would be asked to repent 3 times before they could be killed. Now, anyone who is being asked to repent from leaving salah or we chop your head off, what are they going to do? But they say, nope. They'll repent and they'll do the up and down and then they'll move on with their lives. So this almost never happened. Actually, one of the scholars, al-Buhuti, who does the commentary on this method, says it never happened. Like no one is actually executed for this. It never occurred. It doesn't change for me the problematic piece of the ruling itself. It doesn't change that for me. I still think that there was an oversight with the continuation of something. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. Like I say these things specifically within these courses so that you feel more comfortable with the fact that when we study there are different ways of looking at studying these original texts. Some of them who look at them as completely useless, so they don't look at them anymore, which to me is a problem. I don't accept that. I think that's extremely wrong. I think we're losing out on access to authentic and original Islamic knowledge that no other not a faith, but no other movement has such originality. So when you turn your back on this stuff altogether, then you're losing a part of your history and your identity and something that these people had minds and they thought and they were logical, right? That doesn't mean they were perfect, though. They made some mistakes. And then you have the other group that basically looks at everything being said here to be sacred. And it's neither this nor that. We can look at this and we can make dua for the imam. We can benefit from his knowledge, and then we can point out that maybe that was an oversight, and that's fine. And that balanced approach is what I want people to pick up when they learn Islam. So when you read books, you're able to actually benefit from the knowledge you're reading, and also you have a critical mind, so you step back if this doesn't sound right, and ask questions and figure out maybe that there was an oversight, or maybe there was a context here that you're missing when you're reading. All right. So I'm going to end with that, inshallah ta'ala. We'll start with the Bab al-Adhan wal-Iqam. Of course, he's going to go into depth of all the movements of salah, so we'll go through all of them, inshallah ta'ala. It's not, but he started by just talking about the obligation of salah, and then he'll talk about Adhan Iqam. We'll start with this, inshallah ta'ala, next week. Subhanallah, bihamdihi, la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Muhammad ajma'in. Please take a look at the assignment. If you're unclear on any aspects of it, email Nada or talk to me next week. You're welcome to do so, but please observe it. Jazakumullah.